I came back to myself in fragments, lights first, then pain, then the weight of 1,000 bricks crushing my chest. The walls were white, humming with quiet machines. A nurse hovered nearby, checking my IV. My throat was dry when I whispered, "Did my son come?" She paused. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away, full of something I couldn't name until later pity. The room answered for her, silent, still, soulless. I tried to remember the crash. Headlights, ice, a sickening crunch that tore through the night. I'd gone off the road, that much was clear, but how long I'd lain there, broken and alone, I didn't know. Later, when my lungs could hold more than a shallow breath, I learned the truth. I'd been unconscious for nearly 3 weeks. 3 weeks in that bed, drifting somewhere between this world and the next. No flowers, no cards, not one visitor, not even Brant. I overheard the doctor speaking in hushed tones just outside the door. "She's not likely to recover," he said. "No listed insurance and no family contact has responded. No family. I had raised that boy, sat through every dentist appointment, every scraped knee, every tantrum. I'd sold my grandmother's necklace to cover his college deposit. I once walked home from a night shift in the rain so he could have the car for a date. No family." The nurse Jasmine, I would later learn, told me it was a delivery driver who called the ambulance. My car had been found wrapped around a tree at the edge of Route 7. I was cold, bleeding, barely alive, but not dead. And with each breath that returned, something else came with it. Not gratitude, not even sadness, just a slow, simmering clarity. I had begged the world for love. I had offered everything I had, and when it was my turn to need something, anything, I was met with silence. By the time they moved me out of intensive care, I knew one thing: the woman they left behind in that hospital bed was not the one walking out. And I had no intention of calling him first. Coming home was supposed to be the beginning of healing, but the moment I stepped through the door, I knew it wouldn't be. The air was stale, the light gray and bitter. Dust settled on unopened mail, on framed photos no one had dusted. I lowered myself slowly into the kitchen chair, the one with the wobbly leg Brant always promised to fix. No balloons, no welcome home. Not even a warm casserole dish from a neighbor. Just the hollow hum of the refrigerator and the ache in my spine. I plugged in my phone. It took minutes to boot 3 weeks dead, and when it lit up, I checked my voicemails. There were 3, all from Brant. The most recent one was over 2 months ago. "Hey, Mom, listen. Fallon and I are short on rent again. Think you could spot us $500 just for a week or 2. That was it. No, how are you? No, I love you. Just a hand held out in my direction like always. I tried calling him, just once. It rang, then rang again, then went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I didn't want to hear myself begging. A few days later, the hospital billing department reached out. The number made my breath catch more than I'd made in 6 months of selling paintings. I didn't cry. I just gave them Brant's number. When they called me back, their voice was flat rehearsed. "We spoke with your son. He said," and I quote, "She's alive, right, she'll figure it out. She's always been independent." I sat with that sentence for a long time, rolled it over like a stone in my palm, waiting to see if it cut me. But I felt nothing. No surprise, no pain. Just the dull confirmation of something I'd tried not to believe for years. I opened my contacts, found his name, pressed and held. A red button appeared. Delete. And with it gone, the silence didn't grow louder. It grew clean. I spent the next morning opening windows, letting new air in and sorting through a box of letters I hadn't touched in years. That's when I found the one with Lorabeth's name on the return address. It came on a Wednesday, tucked between a property tax notice and a coupon flyer I would have thrown out if the handwriting on the envelope hadn't stopped me. Looped, graceful, familiar, Lorabeth. I hadn't heard that name in years. We met in a community art class when Brant was still in middle school. She was all silver braids and paint-stained fingers, a retired teacher with a laugh like wind chimes. We drifted apart after she moved up north. Time does that. Inside was a letter from a law office in Eugene, Oregon. Lorabeth had passed away quietly in hospice. No children, no spouse, just a portfolio of art, a modest estate, and apparently a detailed will. She left it all to me. The first time I read the words, I thought there must be a mistake. But then I opened the second envelope, her letter. Elira, I watched your work bloom. I saw you hold on, even when everything around you tried to unravel you. People like you don't get gifts. They make them. Let this one be different. Take it and build the life they didn't think you deserved. L. I sat at the kitchen table, letter trembling in my hands, sunlight catching the corner of a faded watercolor she'd once given me. A hummingbird mid-flight. I never framed it. It lived inside a drawer with better days. The next week, I flew out to Oregon with 2 changes of clothes and my cane. The house sat at the edge of a bluff, weathered but standing proud. Lavender bushes sprawled wild along the walk. The sea murmured in the distance. When I stepped inside, the light was honeyed, like it had waited for someone to return. There was dust. There were repairs needed, but there was no sadness. I stood in the middle of the living room and breathed in the scent of old wood and salt air, and for the first time in months, my shoulders dropped. I wasn't bracing for anything. I opened every window, let the breeze rush in, and started drafting a list of what needed fixing. The silence didn't haunt me. This time it invited me to begin. I had just started on the plumbing notes when my phone buzzed. A message from Brant. The message came at 7:12 p.m. Brant. Heard you're doing okay now. Need help with the house. No, I'm sorry I never showed up. No mention of the hospital. Just that. Help with the house. I didn't answer. The next day they showed up anyway. Fallon wore cream linen and designer sandals. Brant held a bottle of wine he knew I wouldn't drink. They hugged me like we were old friends, not estranged relatives crossing a line they'd redrawn themselves. Wow. Fallon breathed, stepping into the living room, her eyes sweeping across the oak beams and the freshly painted walls. This place is, seriously, Elira, it's beautiful. Brant nodded. Didn't know Aunt Lorabeth had tastes like this. I smiled politely. I didn't say that Lorabeth had left the furniture exactly as it was. She'd simply had dignity, something they never learned to recognize. They stayed the afternoon, touching everything with the hunger of people casing a prize. Fallon snapped photos of the garden. Brant poked around the garage, murmuring about potential upgrades. I poured them tea, listened, let them perform. After dinner, while I washed the cups, I saw the stack of glossy brochures left deliberately on the counter. Sunset Pines, Care You Can Trust, Senior Facilities, Full Package Tours, 2-bedroom assisted living suites, and then Brant, resting his arm on the back of my chair, said lightly, You know, this house is a lot to manage. For one person, I mean. Maybe it's time to think about simplifying, transfer the title, keep things clean tax-wise. I met his gaze without blinking. I've been thinking of making a change, I said. Fallon beamed, like I'd just signed something. I walked them to the door with a blanket folded in my arms, like a hostess grateful for company. They left satisfied, humming arm in arm. When the door shut behind them, I stood still for a long time. Then I placed the brochures in the recycling bin, one by one. That evening, I called Laura Beth's attorney and asked him to begin the paperwork. And the next morning, I invited my realtor friend, Anna, over for tea. They came back the next Saturday, uninvited but expectant. I had already prepared. The table on the back patio was set with a linen cloth, mismatched antique plates, and my favorite china cups, the ones Laura Beth and I once used during our painting sessions. I served French tea, steeped just right a loaf of bread I baked that morning, and a salad picked from the overgrown garden beds Brant hadn't even noticed. Fallon gushed about the breeze, the view, the architecture. Brant smiled, scanning the yard like he already owned it. They made jokes. This place is stunning, but whew, Fallon said, sipping with practiced elegance. Must be hard to manage at your age. Brant laughed. Maybe time to pass the torch, huh? Then Fallon reached into her purse, subtle as always. I know a great real estate lawyer. I can have him call you Monday. I nodded, as if touched. That's thoughtful of you, Fallon. I'll consider it. I excused myself moments later and stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind me. My call went straight through. Mr. Belcroft answered with his usual measured voice. I'm ready, I said. He didn't ask for more. The paperwork had been prepared in advance. We discussed every clause, every distribution, every back door, and safeguard. The house, the land, the small account tied to the estate, all of it was being transferred. But not to Brant. Not to anyone with my last name. To the Elira Foundation for Women in Transition, a nonprofit, I quietly filed 6 weeks ago while Brant hadn't called. Belcroft chuckled. Would you like me to deliver the documents personally? I looked through the window at the patio where Brant and Fallon clinked glasses and whispered like they were halfway to escrow. No, I said. I'll do it myself. I ended the call, folded the phone into my robe pocket, and returned to the table with a soft smile. Fallon leaned forward. So, did you think about what we said? I poured more tea, steady hands, and replied, Oh, I've been thinking quite a lot lately. And by the time they left, the signature was already drying. The night they thought would seal their victory began with pasta and wine. Fallon had brought a salad she didn't make, and Brant arrived in a blazer he hadn't worn since someone else's funeral. I let them sit in the seats they chose, across from each other, a united front of expectation. Dinner was calm. Brant was polite, too polite. Fallon talked about spa retreats and hinted at how wonderful it would be if I had time to just focus on myself. Then Brant cleared his throat, fork scraping his plate. So, Mom, have you had a chance to look over that idea we mentioned? Fallon reached into her bag. We even drafted something, just to get the ball rolling. It's really just paperwork, Elira. She placed the folder beside my plate like an offering. Her nails were perfect, the kind that never scrub a dish. I set down my fork, opened the folder, and began flipping through. Brant leaned in, expectant. Fallon folded her hands like a gracious guest awaiting applause. But they didn't see the second folder, already resting near the teapot. When I was finished humoring them, I slid their document aside and picked up mine, a blue cover slightly worn. I opened it slowly and passed it across the table. Fallon looked confused. Brant's eyebrows furrowed. She read the title aloud. Transfer of property to the Elira Home for Women in Transition. Her voice cracked on the last word. What is this, Fallon demanded. Brant grew pale. You transferred it. You didn't even talk to us. I didn't think I had to, I said, sipping my tea. I've decided to support women who were abandoned, just like I was. Fallon pushed back from the table. You're being ridiculous, vindictive. Brant stood fists clenched, bitter. I stood too slower, but steadier, free. Fallon knocked over her teacup on the way out. The china cracked against the hardwood. Brant didn't say goodbye. I didn't ask them to. When the door shut behind them, I locked it. Then I swept up the pieces, dropped them gently into the bin, and sat in silence, waiting for the morning light. The morning they came back, I was in the garden thinning rosemary. The scent lingered on my fingertips when I heard the shouting from the front drive. Brant's voice cut through the air. Why the hell is the door locked? I stood slowly and wiped my hands on a towel. When I turned the corner, I saw him standing there with a man in a navy suit, his realtor clipboard in hand, and already looking uneasy. A truck idled at the curb. Fallon was still in the passenger seat, arms crossed, sunglasses, hiding nothing. The front porch buzzed with life. 3 women from the Shelter Initiative painting trim in cheerful silence. One of them offered Brant a polite smile before going back to her brushwork. The locks were changed last week, I said, stepping onto the walk. Brant turned. You said you'd transfer the house. I did. I held his gaze. Just not to you. He marched forward, eyes wild. You can't just, this isn't fair. You didn't even tell me. You were never part of the deed, Brant. Never part of the trust. You made that clear years ago. He shook his head like a child, denied a toy. I'll take this to court. I reached into my pocket and handed him an envelope. He ripped it open and scanned the single page, his face drained. Mr. Belcroft's words, concise as ever. You were never listed as beneficiary, heir, co-owner, or trustee. I suggest you move on. Fallon finally stepped out of the car heels, clicking against the walk. We should have done this sooner, she hissed under her breath. She wasn't looking at me, just staring at the women painting her would-be porch. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Brant tore the letter once then, again, like paper could erase facts. He left it fluttering in the flower bed and stomped back to the car. I didn't turn around until their tires spun gravel down the drive. Then I knelt beside the rosemary, collected the torn paper, and dropped it in the compost bin. By dusk, we'd finished the final coat of paint. The porch looked new again. The call came 2 weeks later. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Mom. His voice was smaller. We're behind on rent. Fallon's gone. Took the car. I just need a little help. Just to get back on my feet. I listened. I didn't speak. I know things got messed up, but it's not like I haven't tried. Things just keep happening, and I thought maybe you could just this once. The line went quiet. He waited. And I remembered the last time he said just this once. It was my 65th birthday. He gave me a wrapped box, ribboned and lovely. Inside was a cashmere scarf. The receipt was still in the bottom. I recognized the charge on my own bank statement days later. He had used my card. I hung up without a word. That night, I logged into my bank account and sent a transfer. Amount $2,000 recipient. Brant Caraway memo. Line, this is not for you. This is a refund for the last birthday gift you gave me. The one you asked me to pay for. Then I changed my number. And the next morning, I met with my attorney. We sat at the table in his office, surrounded by shelves of quiet order. He handed me the folder. "This is the updated version," he said. "No heirs listed, just the foundation. No room for contest." "Perfect," I replied. I signed the bottom of the last page, then slipped it back into its envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply released. Released the years I bent myself into knots to be loved. Released the dinners waited for, the birthdays skipped, the phone calls never returned. Released the version of motherhood that required me to keep bleeding just to prove I still cared. And when I walked out into the street, the autumn air carried the faintest trace of salt. I made it home just in time to review the shelter's new kitchen layout before the final permits were signed. The ribbon was pale gold, tied loosely across the gate like it had always belonged there. A dozen chairs lined the sidewalk. Homemade banners fluttered from the porch railings, painted by the women themselves. Some of the kids played near the steps with sidewalk chalk, oblivious to the formality. I stood beside Marcy, the social worker, who once handed me a bag of groceries when I couldn't afford lunch during art school. We hadn't spoken in years. She cried when I called and asked her to cut the ribbon with me. 8 women, 3 children, one house that used to be mine, but was never really only mine. A reporter leaned in as I adjusted the microphone. "What inspired this?" he asked. "Why this mission?" I didn't hesitate. "Because healing should have a door," I said, "and I'm building it." The scissors clicked. Applause followed, quiet and steady. The kind of clapping that feels like gratitude, not obligation. Inside, the smell of warm bread filled the kitchen. The women had baked for days, proud to serve their own celebration. Each room had fresh linens, small hand-painted signs, photos of flowers, cut from magazines and framed with tape. And then I saw her near the back, older now with silver at her temples, but I knew her instantly. Nurse Delora. She smiled soft and knowing. "I thought that was you." I stepped closer, touched her arm. "You were there, in the hospital." "I was," she nodded. "You cried in your sleep, but you held on." I didn't know what to say. "You were fighting even when no one was there to watch." I hugged her. Not out of obligation, but because some things deserved to be seen. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of hands, shaken food, past names learned. But as the sun began to dip, casting gold across the freshly painted steps, I walked the perimeter one last time. The garden beds had been replanted. Tomatoes, squash, sage. One girl, 15, maybe held a paintbrush like it meant something. She asked, "Can I paint a sign for my door?" I nodded, and together we chose a piece of wood from the shed. The house by the sea was quiet again. Not silent, but calm. The kind of quiet you earn after surviving noise you never asked for. I woke early, pulled dough from the fridge and kneaded it slowly, letting my hands remember softness. The oven warmed the kitchen, while the morning sun slipped across the floorboards like honey. Later, I tended the tomatoes. They'd taken to the soil better than I expected. Stubborn things, just like me. By noon, I was sitting at the desk near the window with a sheet of paper in front of me. Not legal paper, not official. Just a page torn from a notebook, the edges slightly curled. My pen hovered before it moved, and the words came slowly, then all at once. You let them go. You let yourself grow. And you chose to live. That was the only revenge worth having. It wasn't addressed to Brant, or Fallon, or anyone from that past life where love came with strings. It was for me, for the woman who lay in a hospital bed and listened to machines instead of voices, for the one who planted hope where bitterness could have bloomed, for the mother who stopped reaching for hands that never reached back. I folded the letter and placed it inside a folder labeled Closure. I didn't lock it away. I just filed it next to my old sketchbooks and grant paperwork, right where it belonged, with the things I built, not the ones that tried to break me. Outside, the waves were louder than usual. The wind carried sea salt and the echo of laughter from the shelter down the road. I stepped onto the porch just as a young girl in a tie-dye shirt came skipping up the path, her curls bouncing with every step. Miss Elira, she called, waving a brush. "Are we painting tomorrow?" I smiled. "Yes, and this time we're painting with light." She grinned and ran back down the path, shouting to her friends. I leaned on the porch rail, breathed in the air, and watched the sky shift. It was no longer about what was taken. It was about what I chose to give.